إلهي وعد الوعد نورا عبر المدى وأنشت ثغر الشوق.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب قلوبنا وشفيء ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، سيما الحجاج بقية الله الأعظم، روحي وأرواحنا له فداء، ولعن دائم على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So, because it's going to be the wafat of Sayyidah Khadija Salamunna alayha in a couple of days, I thought that maybe a good discussion would be about Sayyidah Khadija Salamunna alayha, since we're in the presence of only sisters. So, sometimes we have a wrong perception of Sayyidah Khadija. We have this perception of a lady who protected her husband, who supported her husband, and that was it. And not a woman that actually played a role that nobody can play. First thing. Second, that she actually changed the course of history as well. A woman and a lady like Sayyidah Khadija Salamun alayha, she changed the course of history. But because we look at her role as being a wife to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we don't understand the relation between these. We think she would just because she was the wife of the Prophet, she loved the Prophet, she was compassionate when it came to the Prophet, hence she supported the Prophet, she gave out her wealth to the Prophet. But it's not that simple either. Yes, you can always simplify it, but if I told you, for example, responsibility like being a driver, it's not a difficult thing to drive a car. In fact, it's quite easy to drive a car. But if I told you that you have to be the driver of the 12 Imam, suddenly a simple task becomes very difficult. Why? And it becomes very important as well. Because now it's not only about driving a car, but driving a car for a very important person, and you're playing a crucial role in the history, in the course of history. The same applies when it comes to Sayyidah Khadija Salamun alayha. Yes, on the surface, it looks like she's just the wife of a Prophet. But the reality is that she actually supported the Prophet to an extent that the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said that Islam was spread by the wealth of Sayyidah Khadija. And he was so deeply in love with this woman because of her faith, and not because she was from the opposite gender or because it was his wife. It was his wife because of her faith and her personality, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he actually, even after Sayyidah Khadija, she passed away, he had such a huge respect for Lady Khadija that even when she passed away, he used to respect her friends and her relatives and used to send them gifts and so on and so forth, just because he remembered Lady Khadija. That every time somebody would mention the name of Lady Khadija, he would shed tears because of the love for Lady Khadija. And this was in a society where it was common, not that many years ago, that you would bury your daughters. Imagine the difference here, that you have a Prophet who changed the society from burying their own daughters alive to now respecting a woman to this extent. That every time her name was mentioned, the leader of that society, he would shed tears for her. This huge transformation from hating women to now respecting women to such an extent that Lady Khadija Salamun alayha, she became one of the flag bearers of Islam. And nobody can claim that Islam doesn't respect women. In fact, it's one of the things that we have so many narrations about. Just mention one narration, Man kunna lahu thalatha banat. A person who has 3 daughters, and he has patience with nurturing and the upbringing of those daughters, kunna lahu hijaban yawm al-qiyamah. This person will be protected on the day of judgment from the hellfire. Just the fact that he has daughters, not more than that. Then a person, he said that he asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that's if a person has 3 daughters. What if he only had 2 daughters? He said the same applies for that. Then there was one man only had 1 daughter. Miskeen, he stood up. He asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, does it also apply for a person who only has 1 daughter? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he answered him. He said, yes. she's going to be a hijab for him on the Day of Judgment as well. And even when it comes to giving gifts, and the understanding of having daughters in Islam is considered to be not only a blessing but a good deed compared to boys. I'm not going to mention this in front of men because they won't understand it. But from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, he states, "Al-banat hasanat wal-banun ni'ma." Can you tell me the difference between a good deed and a blessing? What's the difference between the two? A good deed and a blessing. What is the difference between a blessing and a good deed, a sincere good deed? Bismillah. What about the blessing? You'll be asked about it. Exactly, and that's what the narration mentions as well. Al-banat hasanat, girls, they're good deeds. Wal-banun ni'ma, and boys, they're blessings. Wal-hasanat yathabu alayha, yuthabu alayha. So you're rewarded for good deeds. Wal-ni'ma yus'anu anha. But when it comes to blessings, you'll be questioned about them. On the Day of Judgment, if you have boys only, they're going to question you. How did you nurture them? How did you bring what their upbringing? Did you take care of your responsibility, and so on and so forth? And their actions and their behavior, you will be questioned about it as well. But when it comes to girls, no. Yuthabu alayha. You'll only be rewarded for the women. So we should raise the expectations we have for ourselves, especially as women, especially as mu'minat in this country. In a country where they're working against the concept of a family, a nuclear family, if we don't understand our roles, and raise the expectations we should have to ourselves, unfortunately we're not able to change the course of history like Lady Khadija or likewise. You see in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions the example of Lady Maryam as well. Lady Maryam was a person, she thought, or the father of Lady Maryam thought that having a boy is better than having a girl. Why? Because a boy, he can be a khadim in the masjid. That's what they are understanding back then. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He destroys this understanding in the Holy Quran. He completely get rid of this understanding. وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. That's the understanding that they had. And then afterwards, the mother of Lady Maryam, she gave birth to Lady Maryam. And she was surprised. She said, Ya Allah, I asked for a boy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He changed the perception at that moment. Why? Because Lady Maryam became the mother of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, who changed the course of history. And even 2,000 years later, you have billions of people who love Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. And some of them, they even claim that they follow him as well. Because of a pure intention of one woman, Lady Maryam alayhi salam, she changed the course of history. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is as if He wanted us to change our perception when it comes to women as well. Because women should be understood as designers of the society. Why? Because they're the ones nurturing the people and the future generation as well. And that's a reality. That's a responsibility that you can't take away from them. And that's a strength as well, to be considered to be a designer of a society. Hence, the woman is also the greatest target for a lot of individuals when it comes to what? Destroying the Muslim community. That's why a lot of campaigns that they start in order to deviate Muslims, it also starts with women as well. The reason for that is because they understand that, look, if you can deviate the woman, you have deviated the whole family. She's the backbone of the family. She's the designer of the society. And if you can weaken her, you can weaken the whole society. In a society where women have no compassion towards each other, and they don't understand their own strength and own worth as a woman, you know what happens in such a society? They will nurture and bring up weak men, and even the men of such a society will become slaves. Now you go and look at throughout the history of humankind, and you see that's exactly what happened. Every time a certain oppressor was able to weaken the woman in a society, they brought up weak men in that society. The weak men couldn't defend themselves, and they ended up getting killed or massacred. That's the reason for it. And that's exactly why we see in Palestine today, they're targeting what? Women and children as well. 70% of all the victims so far hasn't been Hamas fighters or fighters in general. It's been women and children. And that's the reason for it. Because they understand the backbone for any type of resistance in Palestine is due to the women as well. Because they're the ones who are raising the children and the young men to actually go to the front and defend the Muslims. They understand that. They're the one nurturing and bringing up the women, bringing up the boys that become men and become people that go to the front and actually defend the Muslims, defend the people of Palestine and the people in Gaza. And they understand that. Hence, the Zionist occupation, the first individuals they target, always the women. So if we don't understand our own strength, then obviously we can't have expectations to ourselves. We should consider ourselves to be individuals that are actually able to change the course of history. Just like Lady Maryam she did, just like Sayyidah Khadija she did, and just like Lady Zainab she did. If you look at Lady Zainab salamun alayha, that's exactly the same thing that applies to her as well. If she was able to carry out or be the flag bearer of Karbala and be the second part of the caravan of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, that's only because she was raised by a woman who defended her husband Ali ibn Abi Talib, who defended her husband and the concept of wilaya in her society. We should raise our expectations to ourselves and understand, look, if they're attacking, if they bring out all sorts of weird ideas like feminism and so on and so forth, it's just to target and weaken the women, because they understand that, look, if women are more competent when it comes to interaction with the opposite gender, that's why they want to make a man the benchmark for what's right and wrong and the criteria for success as well. So they're trying to force feed us with this idea that, look at men. They're successful when it comes to their career, for example. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of wealth. You should be just like them. No. A woman, she should embrace her own gender and her own nature, and that's her success as well as a human being. Or else, if you fall for this idea, they understand that they're going to take all the strength that a woman has, they're going to take it away from her. Because the strength lies within us actually living out or embracing our own nature as human beings. And not that we try to be similar to other genders, for example. A man who acts like a woman is not going to be somebody who can defend his family. He's not going to be able to defend his land, his household, his tribe or whatever. He's going to be a weak individual, and he's going to be the source of and the cause of destruction of such a society, and vice versa. The same applies to women as well. If the woman tries to be like a man and they are able to force feed this idea to our future generations, obviously we're going to have a ruined society, and that's going to be the consequences of that. That's why you see, when the Prophet ﷺ, he asked Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam about Fatima al-Zahra, he gave a completely different answer from Fatima al-Zahra salamun alayha. First he asked Fatima al-Zahra, how do you perceive your husband? She said, Ni'mal ba'al, he's a good husband. And look how Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he replies. Then he asked Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, how did you perceive your wife, your spouse? Then he said, Ni'mal aun ala ta'atillah. She's the best helper in being obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He understood that she's the backbone of this family. If it wasn't because of the help of Fatima al-Zahra salamun alayha, I wouldn't be able even to claim my right in such a society. And that's exactly what we see throughout the course of history as well. The beautiful statement, the beautiful lecture from Fatima al-Zahra that is called Khutbatul Fadakiyya. You go read it. You go read it. Khutbatul Fadakiyya. It's a lecture from Fatima al-Zahra salamun alayha. Look at the ideas that she presents, the worldview she presents, the understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala she presents. Greater than any other scholar that we have who's alive today. In fact, our scholars have spent so much time just understanding this beautiful sermon of Lady Zahra salamun alayha. And this was a young woman, she was only 18 years old when she did deliver that sermon. And yet she changed the course of history because she was the one protecting the concept of wilaya at that time. In other words, we wouldn't be sitting here calling us followers of Ahlul Bayt if it wasn't for this sermon of Lady Fatima salamun alayha. She preserved and protected Islam until this day by giving one sermon and delivering one lecture in the masjid at that time. Are you telling me we're not able to change the course of history? Yes, of course we are. We should just raise the expectations we have to ourselves as well, and not be sold by this superficial idea that just look at men because they're the criteria for success. Men are not the criteria for success. That's like telling adults that they should look at children for the criteria of success. They shouldn't be looking at children to see whether they're successful or not. In fact, they're way different from children. And women are way different from men as well. They shouldn't be looking at men to find out whether they actually are successful or not. In fact, if they understand that they're main pillar of the society, they would embrace their own gender, they will embrace their own nature, and they will make sure that they will fulfill or achieve what we call success as well. And even responsibilities in the differences in the responsibilities that we have as well. The same applies there as well. So when it comes to the concept like hijab, I'm just going to mention it quickly. If you look at the different verses we have from the Holy Quran about the concept of hijab, hijab is nothing more than just a manifestation of the strength of a woman. That's it. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created men and women. He saw that between the two genders, who are the most competent when it comes to interaction with the opposite gender? Which one of them are the strongest when it comes to being withheld or withheld? When it comes to emotions, for example, when it comes to interaction with the opposite gender. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He saw it was women, therefore they have a greater responsibility. It's a sign of a strength that you actually have an extra responsibility. Why is it as a man, I have to, for example, provide for my family? Because physically, the average man is stronger than a woman. Therefore, he has a greater responsibility. In other words, all types of responsibilities in Islam is rooted in some sort of a strength that a person possesses. The same applies when it comes to the hijab as well. It's no different. Women are more competent when it comes to your interaction with the opposite gender. Hence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you a greater responsibility. It's a manifestation of a strength and not a weakness. Or now, just because men can't control themselves, whatnot. It's not about that. It's a strength that a woman has, that she has to administrate the interaction with the opposite gender. Why? She's the stronger gender in this field at least. But Sheikhna, women are emotional. Even when it comes to emotions, it's a positive thing. When you define faith, how would you define faith? Iman. How would you define it? How would you define Iman?
Love.
What?
Love. With love.
With love, right? So it's emotions basically. It's attachment basically. Iman, faith in Islam, it's an attachment that you have to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's emotions. So if women are more emotional, they're more successful when it comes to strengthening their iman as well. And we see that. We see that. Sometimes women, because their emotions, and they sacrifice their emotions in order to seek closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their journey are much faster than men. You see, Imam Khomeini rahmatullah alayhi, just to give you one example of a scholar, he used to stand up at night in prayer just to shed a couple of tears, something which is very natural for women to do. Just to shed a couple of tears in his journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Are you telling me that this is a bad thing, or is a weakness that women are more emotional? No, in fact, it's a strength. It all depends on what you sacrifice your emotions for, and not that you have emotions. In fact, it's a positive thing. And we should embrace that. Some people, they think having emotions is a negative thing. Or when men say that women are more emotional, it's a negative thing. It all depends on your emotions. What you sacrificed them for. Lady Zahra salamullah alayha, did she not cry in the masjid and protect the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib? She did. She did. Basically, her emotions became the reason why Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, he was still alive. She protected her husband, the imam of her time, through her emotions. Are emotions a bad thing? Obviously not. It's a strength. But only if we consider it to be a strength and we make sure that we utilize it the right way. Of course, if you want to sacrifice your emotions because in Bollywood movies, for example, or for Hollywood movies where there's a fake love story going on and so on and so forth, or on social media, yeah, of course, it's not a positive thing that you sacrifice your emotions for these things. But now, if you sacrifice it for the right cause, and it's seeking closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, preserving Islam, preserving your family, for example, then it's all a positive thing. In fact, it's a strength for a woman to have emotions, and we shouldn't consider it to be otherwise. That's why you see Sayyidah Ma'suma salamullah alayha, she had this understanding. The daughter of Imam Kadhim alayhi salam, she had this understanding. And that's why she became the reason for scholars throughout the history of Islam have been nurtured and brought up by her because of the center that she built in Qum. No person can claim that they haven't benefited from some sort of a scholar who studied at least for a couple of years of their lives in Qum, or benefited from a scholar who actually studied in Qum. But all of these individuals are in debt to the Lady Fatima Ma'suma salamullah alayha, because if it wasn't for her, there will be no central for students in Qum. The whole city of Qum is based around and centered around Lady Fatima Ma'sooma Salaamullah alayha. In other words, all the scholars that actually have been brought up there and nurtured by Lady Fatima and her spirituality, they're in debt to this woman. Are you telling me she didn't change the course of history? She did, but that's because she understood her own worth. She understood her own worth. Therefore, she raised the expectations she had from herself. She didn't try to be similar to a man, for example, like her brother, Imam Rida alayhi salam, who was buried in Mashhad. She didn't try to be anybody else. She embraced her own nature as a human being. Therefore, she was able to change the course of history. So if we want to take something with us from this, the wafat of Lady Khadija Salaamullah alayha, and the life of Lady Khadija Salaamullah alayha, that is that if we embrace our own nature as human beings, especially as women, we're able to change the course of history. Understand yourself as being the designers of a society. You're the one actually forming and nurturing a whole generation, not just one or two individuals, a whole generation. You're the backbone of your families. Hence, you're the greatest target as well for these individuals. Like if they want to attack the women or attack the family, they start by the women. They try to deviate the women. But if you're not deviated, the rest of the society, they will not be deviated. Not only that, you will bring up strong men that will be able to defend, just like the men in Gaza, the resistance in Gaza, or even South Lebanon for that sake as well. If they're able to do that, it's all because of their women. There was a foreign minister of the United States of America. He once said something. He said, the future of Muslim countries lies in the hands of their women. This moron, he didn't understand that, look, it had always been like that in Islam. And not only the future, the past was in the hands of our women as well. Of Lady Khadija Salaamullah alayha, Fatima Zahra, Lady Zainab, Sayyidah Ma'sooma Salaamullah alayha, all the great scholars that we had, that were females, all of them. It was all in their hands. If the mother of Imam Khomeini Rahmatullah alayhi didn't nurture Imam Khomeini, he wouldn't become Imam Khomeini in the first place to change the course of history. It's all due to his mother. And she was just a simple woman, but she didn't understand that, look, this young boy that I'm raising right now, I'm nurturing right now, is going to change the course of history into the future. She didn't even live long enough to see that, but she did it just because of a pure and sincere intention that she had. This is how you change the course of history, and not to be similar or try to imitate the opposite gender. In fact, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. So if there's any questions, inshallah, I'm at your service. If not, I think I'll leave you alone until iftar time. Any questions? They told me that just a short introduction, and if there's a Q&A or the question and answers, inshallah. Anybody had anything to say, inshallah, I'm at your service. Bismillah.
How do you combat the pressure we have on women today or society? Like the pressure it puts on women and Muslim women to be like men,
Yeah.
or to be more like promiscuous.
Yeah.
How do we combat that?
Yeah. First and foremost, I think it's something which is related to men as well, because unfortunately, we live in a society today where men, they're not living up to their own responsibilities, but yet they expect women to do that. So for example, if you have a household where the man is supposed to provide for his woman, yeah, and at the same time he expects her to take care of the most of the work at home as well. So she has to nurture the children, she has to cook food, she has to clean, and so on and so forth. So there's I would say that the responsibilities are not delegated the right way or according to Islam, and that unfortunately sometimes bring a woman in a situation or put her in a position where it gets too much for her, and that's understandable as well. And therefore, unfortunately, a lot of the feminist movements that we have in the society, they are actually able to brainwash some of the sisters because of that as well. And that's because the men are not living up to their responsibilities. So they're not taking care of their responsibilities. Therefore, the women, they end up becoming a target or becoming an easy victim for a lot of these movements. That's one thing. Second, when it comes to being promiscuous and so on and so forth, the best thing that you can do is actually to present an alternative way of living for the people in the society. So let's say, for example, the different responsibilities that you have. tell people, or at least convey the message that, look, having a social responsibility without being a promiscuous person is actually possible. I'm wearing the hijab. I'm a religious person. I administrate my interaction with the opposite gender, yet still, I'm still a part of this society. I still carry out a social responsibility in this society. In other words, that it's actually possible to live an alternative way than what we are being fed with in the society, or in the society that we're seeing right now. And try to talk about some of the consequences of these things as well. So let's say that some of the industries that are exploiting or taking advantage of women, you can mention some of them. Look at the consequences, the mental issues it causes amongst young women, for example, the diseases it causes. Like, you have people that, I saw this to some of the statistics, even suicide, like a lot of this statistics about suicide is related to young girls not considering themselves to be anything worth, because they're sitting on social media 24/7, looking at these women, for example, that are living up to a certain type of beauty ideal which they can't themselves, therefore they end up committing suicide. So try to mention some of the negative consequences of this idea, and understand the history as well. Just give you a brief introduction to the history of why it actually became like this, like where the woman is being exploited for their own personal, or because of profit. You see, in the history of Europe, women, they used to be home and nurture their children. But you had certain individuals, especially the ones that were the owners of factories at that time, after the Industrial Revolution. They saw that if we want cheap labor work, we can get that from women. So they were the ones, that's funny enough, it was men that actually started a lot of these feminist movements, because they tried to get them out of their houses, put them in factories, and give them 1/3 of the salary they used to give to men. So it was cheap labor for them. So they exploited women at that time. So after that, they started other movements as well. For example, that women should have the right to own, which is a basic thing in Islam. But it started in the 18th century here in Europe. Why? Because if she go to work and everything that she earns belongs to her husband, she's not going to be motivated to work. Therefore, we have to fight for her right to own as well. So look, all the ideas behind it was not to, we want to free women, or women should be independent. We should help women having better rights or better circumstances. No, it was all about exploitation. It was all about getting cheap labor. How do we do it? First and foremost, start the movements. Make sure that they go from the house to the factories. When they're in the factories, make sure that everything they earn become their own money. Second, when it comes to inheritance and when it comes to marriage or being promiscuous, they removed all the laws they had about, for example, relationships out of marriage and whatnot. So they removed all of those laws at that time. So it was all about exploitation. So you see, the men that were exploiting this was the people that profited from it. So they gained a lot of wealth because of the women that came to the factories and were working in the factories. But unfortunately, these women, they thought that, no, we're actually doing something with our lives here. Why? Now we have our own income, we are earning some money, and we're getting rich. They're not getting rich. The guy who's the owner of the factory is getting rich. They're getting 1/3 of what they were giving men at that time. So today is no different. Today they just changed the industry. So now it's modeling, it's makeup, it's fashion, it's a lot of different industries right now that are exploiting women. Therefore, you see, for example, if they want to sell a small bottle of perfume, it's not a man that put out. It's a woman. It's a woman. Even men's perfume, if they want to sell it to a man, they put out a narrative as if he wears this perfume, this is the type of women that he will get. So they're exploiting women only for the sole purpose of actually selling their product. It's all about money for these individuals. Therefore, they're taking advantage of women. So if we understand the history behind it, the concept behind it, the reason to it, and we can explain it and some of the consequences of it as well, then obviously a lot of people, they will be disgusted by it. If you just look at the industry, how many billions of dollars they actually are making, and at the same time look at the statistics over young women that are actually dealing with or suffering from mental issues because of those industries. If you compare the two, that some people are getting rich because of the mental issues of some individuals or because they're exploiting these young women. If you can convey that message or explain that to a person, obviously they will be discussed, and that itself will be start some sort of a movement towards getting rid of some of these industries. And that's why they hate Islam as well. They know Islam gets rid of these industries, the alcohol industry, the gambling industry, I don't know, all these types of industries that where they're exploiting human beings, taking advantage of human beings for their own purposes because of their own wealth. Islam would get rid of that. That's why they hate Islam as well. It's all about money for these individuals. So try to convey that message. Always follow the money, as they say. Always follow the money. Then you know who's behind the industries as well, and why they have a hatred towards Islam and animosity towards Islam as well. For all the people that passed away, that are not with us anymore, especially all the women throughout the history of Islam that nurtured and brought up generations that preserved and protected Islam, so we can sit here today and remember Lady Khadija Salamun alayha. Please recite a Fatiha, تسبقها صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.